noite! Boa noite, boa noite, boa noite, boa noite, galera! Sejam todos bem-vindos aí ao nosso canal do YouTube! Vamos aí começar as operações aí do além, Forex do ar, para vocês aí. Vamos lá, pessoal. Vai começar aí operações aí do além. Vamos ver o que a gente pode fazer. Ah, o ouro deve cair aí, tá, pessoal? Quem quiser vender, eu vou comprar o Dow e estou vendendo o ouro, tá? Vendida aí no ouro, vendemos na abertura, beleza? E estou comprado no Dow. Comprado aí no Dow. Vamos sair no Dow aqui, ó. No bem aqui, ó. No 26.950, tá, galera? Vendido aí no ouro. O stop no ouro tá R$94, tá, pessoal? 14,94 é o stop do ouro aí, quem vendeu. Galera, quem quiser entrar lá no Goldmeet, tá aí, ó, o link. Estamos vendidos aí no ouro, tá? Aí quem vendeu comigo aí na abertura, nós vendemos aí no 14,91,85. Então o nosso gain vai ser no 14,88, tá, galera? Ok? O Dow tá indo aí. Alvo do Dow aqui no 26.970, tá? Deve dar uma esticada aí, pessoal. Aproveita a oportunidade. Ó, vendido aí no ouro, tá? Vendemos aí no 14,91. O stop tá no 14,94 e o alvo é 14,88. O Dow, estamos comprado aí no 26.880 e o alvo é 26.980, tá? E o stop do Dow é aqui, ó. É no 26.835. Ok? Vamos lá, pessoal. Vocês pegaram aí os pontos.
He might say, well, you know, we're going to be careful and watch and see what's going on. But he did keep that door wide open. And interesting, too, even though they're not as export dependent, say, as Korea and Indonesia, he said the demand for Indonesia's exports remains their biggest external growth risk. And yes, he himself said the door's open to a rate cut today. Let's listen.
I think the room for another cut is still open. I mean, looking some accommodative policies already there. We see also the outlook for the inflation, also the stable of the exchange rate. I think we're able to make another cut as long the risk coming from the global, the risk coming from domestic will not, destroy what our target.
They don't want to upset their inflation target. They're in good territory for that. Another very important thing to mention here is that they had a slight unexpected jump in their trade deficit. Again, their exports also down 10 quarters in a row, but their current account gap has narrowed just a bit. Another thing that gives them room to cut. Remember, last year, one of the reasons they had to raise their key rate 5 times because the rupiah was getting so beaten up. That happened to a lot of Asian currencies. The rupiah has been stable. In fact, Deputy Governor Doty said that's another reason why they can go ahead and move now. So it'll be a bigger surprise than ever, Heidi, if for some reason they change their mind, they don't move. It looks like it's pretty much a done deal. All right, our Global Economics and Policy Editor Kathleen Hayes there with a preview of Bank Indonesia. That decision out later today. I'm still ahead. After more than 6 hours of testimony, Mark Zuckerberg is yet to convince lawmakers that Facebook can be trusted to handle its planned Libra cryptocurrency. But up next, Tesla shares soar as the company makes an unexpected profit. We dig into those numbers with Tigress financial partners Ivan Feinseth. This is Bloomberg. In Sydney, and I'm Sherrian in New York. You're watching Daybreak Australia. Tesla stock is jumping in late trading after a surprise by posting its first profit in almost a year. Joining us now is Tigress financial partner CIO Ivan Feinseth. Ivan, great to have you with us. So give us a breakdown of what you think the numbers look like.
Well, first is they're profitable, and that's one of the big things everybody's looking for. Second is they opened the Shanghai, China factory, which opens to them the world's largest car market and also the largest electric car market, because China has mandated they want to be 100% electric by 2030, which is not that far off. And they still increased production, and even though they missed their goal of, I think, 100,000 cars, they still came pretty close, in my view. That was a great quarter for them.
Is it a concern that revenue, though, is slowing? Does that say something about where Tesla's growth can come from in the future?
Well, I don't think it's slowing as much as the mix is now shifting more toward the 3, which is a lower priced car than the S. And the next big thing for them will be the Y.
Ivan, I want to throw up this chart taking a look at gross margin, because that's really why we've seen the stock pop and reach like $306, I think, the last time that I checked in the session today. In terms of the gross margin, though, as much as it's looking better now, can this be maintained? Because it seems like largely we saw that quarter impress on the back of some pretty serious cuts, right? We've had 3 rounds of job cuts since late last year. We've had, some restructuring of internal departments as well. Is that a sustainable way to drive future growth?
Well, I think most importantly, you want to see unit growth, and then you want to see revenue growth, and of course you want to see profitability. But to me, really what matters is, net profit, not so much the gross profit. And I think over time, probably the gross margin may contract slightly, again, as the mix toward lower priced cars, including the 3 and then eventually the Y, starts to lean more to those cars. The margin may come down, but they continue to experience very strong demand for their cars. They do, market well, and they have proven again and again to a lot of skeptics that it's a great car and there's a strong demand and a big market for it.
Yeah, I thought the sort of, some of the concerns, or one of the sort of perennial concerns, was the production bottleneck and what's happening with the pipeline around. That was really addressed in an upbeat way in the investor letter and in the release today. They're ahead of schedule for the Model 3 factory in Shanghai. They're also ahead of schedule when it comes to Model Y production, expecting to launch by summer 2021. Do you think we should be cautious here? Have they resolved their production issues? Do you expect them to be able to hit the production targets for Shanghai, for example, by the end of the year?
Well, I think the key is demand. I mean, I'd rather have a production bottleneck with a strong demand than the reverse. So they continue to improve their capabilities. The new factory in China is a major game changer, and they still have a lot of capacity in their Fremont factory to continue to ramp production, because the factory that they occupy at one time produced over 1 million cars a year when it was a General Motors factory.
Especially when it comes to that factory in China, they kept emphasizing how cheap it is to make those Model 3s in China. In that sense, though, should we be a little bit more concerned about the pressure on margins as they gravitate towards the lower price models?
I'm not that concerned about margins. Overall, a lot of people on Wall Street look at gross margin. I don't think gross margin is as important as the net margin, but and that I think will come as they continue to increase the operating efficiency of the company and also amortize their operating costs over more and more cars.
What about the fact that the trade tensions between the U.S. and China continue? Are you concerned about consumer backlash or retaliatory tariffs in China?
Well, right now we are also in an environment of this de-escalation of trade tensions. I mean, both President Trump and Chinese President Xi need a trade deal. And while they're both kind of playing the political angle on it, I think we've already started to see the first phase, as President Trump calls it, phase 1. And President Xi in China is under a lot of pressure to make a deal, because since this whole trade war began, China's stock market and China's economy has been suffering. They reported the lowest quarterly GDP growth in 27 years. That's this current quarter. So I think that we will see a de-escalation of tensions, so we won't experience that kind of backlash.
Ivan, I thought it was also perhaps a bit telling that the investor letter wasn't signed off by Elon Musk. Is there a sense that perhaps he's taking more of a, low-key, low-profile approach these days to leadership?
I don't think you would ever see him take a low-key or profile. I don't know why he didn't sign off on it. I wouldn't read much into that, but he's definitely the face of the company. He's definitely the driving force of the company, and I don't think there's anything low-key about him, which is part of his appeal and part of the appeal of the company.
Yeah, I really can't imagine low key and Elon Musk going in the same sentence. Ivan Feinstein, thank you so much for joining us. Tiger's Financial Partners CIO with his views on Tesla's latest earnings. And you can also turn to your Bloomberg for more on Tesla, including updates from their earnings call beginning at the bottom of the hour. Go to TLIV Go to get commentary and analysis from Bloomberg's expert editors. This is Bloomberg.
Todos estiveram envolvidos na missão, um esforço coletivo.
I was actually poor.
No foreplay?
Eat your bag of Lay's with a smile on your face.
All the diseases have been taken. I'll take a tax.
President Trump, who's seeking to take credit for a ceasefire in Syria, painting it as a victory for his unconventional foreign policy. As part of the agreement, he removed all US sanctions imposed after Turkey launched its military operation.
Sanctions will be lifted unless something happens that we're not happy with. This was an outcome created by us, the United States, and nobody else.
All right, let's get over to DC. Our reporter there, Greg Sullivan, joins us. Greg, the immediate lifting of the sanctions, the latest news, Trump really kind of saying, well, I told you so, this was the right thing to do. Is that being taken well in Washington?
That's right. President Trump trying to claim victory for a ceasefire that he says Turkey has said will be permanent today. However, it's not quite landing with lawmakers on Capitol Hill. While Trump is lifting sanctions and saying that the ceasefire is permanent, lawmakers' reactions ranged from skeptical that this was definitely a deal that would hold to downright critical. Some Republicans, even in his own party, said that it appeared that the deal benefited Russia and Turkey more than anyone else. What's interesting also is that at the same time that we have Trump trying to take victory for this, we heard that from Trump's envoy to Syria on the Hill, and he warned that the deal was likely to, that the deal could lead to the resurgence of the Islamic State. He also said that in northern Syria, some 100 detainees from the Islamic State had escaped, which seemed to kind of contradict what President Trump said when he said that they'd been largely recaptured.
Yeah, an implicit criticism there coming from his own envoy to Syria. So what does this mean for other potential sanctions now that President Trump has lifted his sanctions?
Well, President Trump, for his part, did warn that he would reimpose sanctions if Turkey made him unhappy. In Congress, it's a different story. House Democrats say that they're moving forward on a sanctions bill. But over on the Senate side, some Republicans expressed a little bit more caution. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell actually tamping down expectations, saying that sanctions shouldn't be the first, last, and only resort. So unclear what will eventually come from Congress, but there is some movement and some caution to see how this deal actually plays out.
And on the impeachment front, it's been a pretty busy day. Laura Cooper, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, she was scheduled to start her appearance before the House impeachment investigators this morning, but there was a delay because we had a group of lawmakers disrupting her proceedings, essentially with the President's own blessing. So what was going on, Greg?
That's right. Here we were set to hear from this Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Laura Cooper, about delays in military aid. But her testimony didn't start for nearly 5 hours because about 24 Republicans actually stormed the secure area where Democrats are holding these testimonies. These are areas that are supposed to be soundproof and really secure from foreign adversaries trying to intercept things. Lawmakers usually have to leave their electronics outside. But these 24 lawmakers had actually, some of them had met with President Trump and explained their plan to do this last night. And he appeared to give them their blessing. So today they went in, basically made their way past security, and according to some lawmakers, created quite a scene with some screaming and yelling. The Republican lawmakers have frequently complained that they're locked out of some of these hearings because lawmakers not sitting on these three committees aren't generally allowed to be in it. But Democrats have vowed that they will hold public hearings at some point after this initial phase in the impeachment inquiry.
Greg Sullivan in D.C., thank you so much with that update on everything going on in Washington. Let's now get a quick check of the latest business flash headlines. WeWork will spend the next month putting together a plan that will prioritize profit over growth, including job cuts. The company's new executives gave staff an overview of their vision in their first meeting since WeWork announced a takeover by its largest shareholder, SoftBank. Management has been weighing the sale or closure of various assets, including software businesses and an elementary school. India will spend about $6 billion on two unprofitable state-run telecoms companies in a bid to help them take on the competition. The government is combining the two companies, Mahananja Telephone Nigam and Bharat Sanchar Nigam, as part of the plan. Mahananja has reported losses in 9 out of the past 10 years, according to data compiled by Bloomberg. Well, coming up next, we get a reaction to Boeing's earnings with Jefferies Aerospace and Defense analyst Sheila Kyogu. This is Bloomberg. It is 9:30 a.m. here in Sydney. The market open this Thursday morning is just 30 minutes away. This is how the futures session is shaping up. Big day of earnings for investors to pass. We had US stocks ending moderately higher, and that's trickling through to a pop when we get ahead to the Sydney Open. I'm Heidi Stroud-Watts here in Sydney, and I'm Sherriani in New York, where 6:30 p.m. p.m. You're watching Daybreak Australia. Let's get the first world news with Radhika Gupta. Radhika.
Thanks, Sherry. China is planning to sell euro-denominated bonds amid a slump in borrowing costs in the currency. It would be China's first euro bond issuance in 15 years. Average yields on investment-grade euro bonds are below 0.5%, close to a record low hit in August. China returned to the dollar bond market 2 years ago after a gap of about 13 years. Meanwhile, China is taking another step to opening up to foreign investment. It'll allow foreign firms not already engaged in the investment business to conduct equity investment in domestic companies. It's the latest in a series of moves to make it more attractive and convenient for foreigners to invest. Earlier this month, regulators announced a timetable for foreign financial firms to take full control of Chinese ventures. A pro-establishment lawmaker in Hong Kong has confirmed that Beijing is considering a plan to replace Carrie Lam as chief executive. Michael Tien says he has information that the Chinese government is considering candidates to fill Hong Kong's top job next year. But China's foreign ministry reiterated its long-standing position that the central government still firmly supports Lam.
It is a political rumor out of ulterior motives. The central government will firmly support Chief Executive Carrie Lam and the Hong Kong government's administration in accordance with the law to stop violence and restore order as soon as possible.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has courted more than 40 leaders of African nations in Sochi at the first ever Russia-Africa summit. Putin hailed what he called the continent's enormous potential for growth and negotiated deals to tap its riches, including diamonds, uranium and oil. Russia is following China in expanding its influence in the region. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Rishka Gupta, this is Bloomberg.
Radhika, thank you. Australia opens at the top of the hour. So, what are you watching?
Heidi, plenty of corporate updates to wade through from Australia. Qantas this morning reported a 1.8% yearly rise in first quarter revenue thanks to international operations offsetting domestic weakness, and measures are being taken to mitigate the impacts from Hong Kong protests, which has seen denting first half profit for the carrier by 25 million Australian dollars. And Fortescue keeping guidance for iron ore shipments, direct costs and capex, and the miner said its share buyback program will be renewed for a further 12 months. And Newcrest this morning posted a drop in gold and copper output, but has boosted its full-year guidance due to its Canadian operations. Now, that acquisition of the Red Chris mine plus maintenance shutdowns, that's expected to dent free cash flow for Newcrest in the first half of fiscal 2020. Now, turning to Aussie casinos, Star Entertainment reported a 1.5% rise in group domestic revenue for the July 1st to October 21st period, with an uptick in the VIP rebate revenue area. Now, Crown Resorts, on the other hand, saw a 46% yearly drop in VIP program play turnover, and its main floor gaming revenue that came in up about 2%, while non-gaming revenue was broadly flat. And this morning, Crown also responded to allegations of corruption around the casino operator's international VIP program, which will be the focus of public hearings next week. Sherry, the chairman, saying that illegal activity will not be tolerated. Sherry.
So thank you so much for that. And it was a seesaw day for Boeing shares. It almost doubled the size of its credit facilities and said its troubled 737 MAX jet will win clearance to fly again later this year. Sheila Kayalu covers Boeing and the aerospace industry as an analyst for Jefferies. She's with me here in the New York studio. Sheila, great to have you with us. Of course, it all depends on when the 737 MAX comes back, right? But I wonder if they will actually get clearance from the FAA, especially after last week's bombshell instant messages revelations, showing some hesitation over the 737 MAX years before the crashes.
Sure. So putting TechSgate aside, what we actually saw last night, which was pretty positive, was FAA Administrator Steve Dixon said that he actually received the final load for the software update. So stepping a step back, what happened was in June, Boeing submitted its MCAS software system update. What happened was the FAA came back and said it needed another system upgrade. And what's going on right now is that final certification submission. So versus Friday's message where the FAA seemed angry and upset with Boeing, this seems a very positive step almost 4 days later.
How much will this help with their cash flow issues?
So the 737 MAX is the single biggest driver of both revenues and earnings for the company. It is a very high margin program. We estimate 30% gross margins. So it is a big driver. What's happening right now is Q3, free cash flow was a use of about $3 billion, and that's because inventory is sitting on the balance sheet. You're essentially getting zero advances for the 737s that you're building up.
Sheila, I want to throw up a quick chart looking at exactly how closely the ties between the fortunes of the 737 MAX and Boeing are tied, right? This is looking at the sales reversal. Their sales growth has essentially been held back by the 737 MAX. BA there in the yellow, and you've got Airbus there in the purple there, really going in the opposite direction. In terms of the, I guess, damage to reputation and sentiment, is it going to take them a long time, even after the regulatory issues, after the ground issues are addressed?
So I think what's happening in terms of narrow-body production is obviously you have a halt from Boeing with the MAX grounded. Airbus is somewhat behind their A320neo schedule as well. You haven't seen many orders to date, or actually you've seen net orders below zero to date, because you've seen some cancellations, but not a significant amount of cancellations, to be quite honest, outside of airlines going into bankruptcy. On the wide-body side, that's where you've seen some hits, and Boeing cut their 787 production today. They're producing those at 14 per month. When you think of global wide-body production, there's about 38 wide-bodies produced across both Boeing and Airbus models. So the 787 is a large part of that. They haven't seen a China order in almost 2 years, and that's why they're deciding to cut their production rate to 12 a month at the end of next year.
Is the Chinese side of the story really going to be dependent on how quickly China can ramp up their homegrown production?
So in terms of the China order side of the story, for the 787 it is important because it's about 20% of deliveries to date have been to China. So it is an important driver of demand for that aircraft. In terms of China's competing offering, the C919 is a narrow body, so there isn't a competitive threat when it comes to wide bodies.
Do we get a sense that perhaps Chinese orders were cut back due to the trade tensions with the U.S.?
Sure. Yeah, I think significantly cut back by trade tension. What you're also seeing is the WTO trade agreement with tariffs being put on. So that's probably going to put pressure on European orders. Airbus is going to retaliate back. So you are seeing macroeconomic factors with tariff and trade really impacting orders for aircraft.
CEO Dennis Muilenburg expected to speak in Congress next week. What will investors need to hear from him to get some reassurance that Boeing is going in the right direction?
Sure. So I think they want to know that Boeing is implementing steps to make this a safer company, to not have accidents happen again. They've done several things. They've created committees. They've revamped the board a little bit. So they're putting those steps forward, and I think that's what investors are looking forward to, is that as well as the MAX getting back up in the air. I think one of the negatives we were hoping for today was the 787 rate cut, as well as the 777X, another wide-body aircraft being delayed because of the GE engine being late. So those were two negatives being taken off the table, and I think that's what helped the stock sort of work in the morning, and then we'll look forward to the MAX as the next positive catalyst.
Sheila, does what's going on with the loan books concern you at all, having essentially to double their credit facilities?
Sure. So we put out a report yesterday looking at liquidity, and what we looked at was if they are estimating a run rate free cash flow outflow of about $3 billion a quarter, how long could they sustain this 42 a month production rate on the narrow bodies? Because you are still paying your suppliers, but your customers aren't paying you. So we said that you could sustain this production growth of production of 42 a month for the next 2 quarters, so for Q4 and Q1. And of course, Boeing has taken steps to take out an additional credit facility, so we think they have access to liquidity that won't be a problem. But they want to keep a cash balance on hand, of course.
Sheila, thank you so much for joining us and for those insights. Jefferies analyst Sheila Kayalu there joining us. Well, don't forget, if you're away from a screen, you can always find in-depth analysis on the day's big news makers over at Bloomberg Radio. We're now broadcasting live from our brand new studio there in Hong Kong. You can listen in via the app, that's Bloomberg Radio Plus, or on BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg.
cryptocurrency? Are you a bank? What is this association?
It's a very complex project, and as you say, it's risky.
Do you consider Libra to be money?
I consider Libra to be a payment system.
So it's like me having my money in Wells Fargo Bank.
You could think about it that way. Okay. Although we're not a bank, we're not applying for a bank charter. I think that the right analogy.
But that's the problem.
This is
Mr. Zuckerberg. That's the problem. That's what we're facing here.
My commitment is that we're not going to launch the Libra payment system here or anywhere else around the world until we get the approval from FSOC and the other relevant U.S. financial regulators.
The American competitiveness angle and the competition with China is a national security issue.
In China especially, they immediately kicked off this public-private partnership with some of their biggest companies in order to race to try to build a system like this quickly.
Will it be possible to conduct anonymous transaction using Libra? There's a whole host of problems. So will Libra allow anonymous transactions?
I think that it is an open question.
It's pretty hard to stop anonymous trading. Have I missed something there?
Congressman, I think that this is probably more of a policy issue and question.
But as your code currently exists, can you transact anonymously with Libra?
Congressman, it certainly would be possible to build a system that would allow that.
I want to ask you a very simple question. Mr. Zuckerberg, are you a capitalist or are you a socialist?
Congressman, I would definitely consider myself a capitalist.
Frankly, I'm not sure that we've learned anything new here.
That was the Facebook CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, testifying in front of the House Financial Services Committee. All right, joining us now to discuss that hearing, we are joined by Tech Economy founder, David Kirkpatrick. David, great to have you. It essentially turned into, open season for the airing of grievances related to Facebook's technologies. And I suspect you're going to say, I told you so. You thought this was exactly how it was going to play out.
I think I said it on Bloomberg last week. I mean, honestly, anybody who's aware of how the world views Facebook, which seems to be pretty much everyone except for Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, would have known that he would hit a firestorm by going into that hearing, and it would be on far more issues than just Libra.
Yeah, and one of the questions, I think the committee chairwoman, Maxine Waters, said, you guys should stop working on Libra until you can fix all of your other problems, which are well documented. Is that a fair point?
It is a fair point. I mean, ultimately, there was a debate inside the company at the time they announced Libra about whether it was a good idea to even proceed, because they were getting so much pushback on so many other issues, and obviously a system of money which is so much based in trust was a very risky thing to launch in the face of a tremendous epidemic of distrust that already afflicted them. So they have there's tons of reasons why one should be cautious about trusting Facebook. And even though they've set this thing up, Libra, if it were to ever happen, as an independent association that they're just one of many members of, everybody knows it's their idea. They're the ones that are going to capitalize on it the most, because they have the 2.7 billion people around the world that they can deploy it to.
David, do you buy into Mr. Zuckerberg's China argument that if Facebook doesn't do it, then China will rise in dominance when it comes to this sphere?
I think there's something to it, but it doesn't really matter very much. I mean, look, Alipay is already, I think, the world's biggest payment network, and it's Chinese. I don't think a Chinese cryptocurrency would necessarily do very well outside of China. We don't know. And anyway, if it really was a cryptocurrency in the way that they're talking about Libra being, it wouldn't really necessarily matter that much who owned it, or who controlled it. But these are such speculative questions. The U.S. is, in a tech battle with China. That's true. But Facebook is Facebook. They're the ones going up against China here, not the United States. Facebook has not invited the U.S. government to partner with them in developing this thing, which probably would be the only step they could take that would allow it to actually occur. He has said he won't do it unless they allow him to, but he isn't really bringing them into the process, which, frankly, I think he should have done long ago.
Do you think that there is a broad understanding in the U.S. government, as you see the Congress testimony being carried out, of what Libra entails?
Well, I think some of the questions were foolish and ignorant today, but many of them were also very intelligent. I mean, I think there's a wide span of knowledge about tech in general and cryptocurrencies in specific among the House Financial Services Committee members and people in Congress. I don't fault Congress on not understanding this stuff. I think they were asking a lot of good questions. I mean, asking whether Zuckerberg is a capitalist or a socialist seemed like off the point, as you just showed. I don't know why that Republican congressperson asked that, but I don't think the questions were stupid. I think there's a ton of really good, very basic questions to ask Facebook right now about whether they can be trusted, and many of them were asked.
That question, though, does show, something of the bias or perhaps where lawmakers are really coming from in terms of how they feel about Facebook and in fact, how they probably feel about Mark Zuckerberg as an individual. Does that taint Libra, whether or not it's a good idea?
I don't think it does, because actually, if anything, right now, Facebook is being perceived to be on the side of the Republicans. The absolutism of free speech that he has been pronouncing at the speech at Georgetown last week and in a Wall Street Journal op-ed and other places basically serves the interests of people who would promulgate more or less deceptive political advertising, which I think is generally acknowledged is more likely to happen from the right at the moment worldwide than from the center or the left. So, Democrats are not happy with Facebook right now. He got more favorable treatment today in the committee from Republicans than Democrats, I would say.
David, let's move on from Facebook. We're looking at Amazon earnings by the end of the week. What are your expectations, particularly as we keep going back to the strength of the U.S. consumer as the bright spot in this economy?
Well, I think Amazon is the last place that U.S. consumers are going to stop spending on. So even if U.S. consumer spending were to slow discernibly, which I don't think it has yet, Amazon still more or less is perceived by consumers as a cheaper place to buy than the local store, and it's certainly more convenient, and people are going to be more busy if their economic situation is not as good and they're having to work harder, etc. I don't see Amazon being hurt in the near term by economic consumer spending decline. I do think that on the other side of Amazon's business, their web services for businesses, they are getting more and more successful competition from Microsoft in particular. I'm hearing more and more about companies trying to pull out of AWS and move elsewhere. They're so dominant in hosting that I think it's going to be a hard business for them to continue growing at the pace they have. They're doing a lot of things. That's the thing about Amazon. They have so many businesses, it's hard to keep track. They're doing good on the Alexa business, for example.
So we are also seeing the cloud competition coming from rivals, not to mention that Amazon just moved to one-day shipping and so forth. So are you at all concerned about their expenses side of things?
Well, certainly one-day shipping is a controversial move. They are absolutely adamant that they will continue to grow their share of online commerce. In the U.S., they sell 20% of everything sold online, and they want to grow that higher. And one-day shipping is an extraordinary offer, and it's very expensive for them, but it is logical if they want to absolutely, unequivocally hold on to their dominant market position, because nobody else is even close to them in terms of the kind of ease of use of their services. I mean, people buy dishwashers walking down the sidewalk on Amazon now. It's that easy. Amazon has created a whole new sort of spending economy, and they continue to refine it and improve it. It is problematic financially, but I think they're very smart to guarantee that they will continue to dominate.
David, always great having you with us. Thank you.
Thanks
David Kirkpatrick, Techonomy founder. Now, as Facebook faces scrutiny for its Libra project, one of the largest cryptocurrency exchanges is looking to develop its own potential competitor, a digital currency called Venus. Bloomberg's China correspondent Selena Wang joins us from Shanghai. And Selena, you spoke to Binance's co-founder. What did she say about their crypto plans?
Binance's co-founder described it to me as a bit like an independent regional autonomous version of Libra. Now, there are some overlapping missions between Facebook's Libra and Binance's Venus, but Venus is an open blockchain project that is more focused on supporting the financial autonomy of developing countries. So the co-founder also described it to me as a sort of Belt and Road version of Libra, given that it's going to be rolling it out in individual countries that roughly align with China's expansion of the Belt and Road Initiative. In contrast, Facebook's Libra has a greater focus on reducing the cost of money remittance and transfer. So take a listen to what else she had to say.
We need more currencies to be involved to hedge. We need more commercial institutes to help ordinary people to dilute financial risks. Of course, we need to make sure people who haven't received any financial service to have the service. So we've started doing Venus Project.
You've called Venus the Belt and Road version of Libra, but the Chinese government has outlawed digital asset exchanges as well as initial coin offerings. So how do you plan to work with the Chinese government in that environment?
China has been rapidly developing in the industries of mobile, internet, and fintech. We can see the Chinese government is very supportive to the whole blockchain industry. We've called Venus a Belt and Road. It means in which region people really need a project like Venus. There are still many people who are suffering from a lack of financial services. For example, they still don't own a single bank card.
China is planning to release its own cryptocurrency that would give it more control of the financial system. So what do you make of that project and the future of cryptocurrencies in China?
We believe all countries around the world will release their own cryptocurrency in the future, and they will roll out very strict measures to supervise the industry. That's where Binance's value lies, to help them clearly supervise the cryptocurrency industry and ensure stable, sustainable development.
So Binance's Venus project as well as Facebook's Libra, they're both very theoretical at this moment, but when Binance does start ramping up, they're likely going to face similar scrutiny that Libra has, especially when it comes to concerns around money laundering and privacy. But the co-founder also said that they're learning from Facebook's mistakes and are planning to take a more conservative approach when they start rolling out, focusing more on regulatory compliance.
Selena, thank you so much for that. Selena Wang there in Shanghai. Fascinating stuff and really uncharted waters for regulators. You can watch us live and see our past interviews on our interactive TV function. That's at TV Go. You can also do a dive into any of the securities or the Bloomberg functions that we talk about. Join in on the conversation. Send us instant messages during our shows. This is for Bloomberg subscribers only. Do check it out. It's at TV Go. This is Bloomberg.
Francisco, a lot of tech action.
Our top stories this morning in D.C. and
the Dow and the S&P down.
We saw the euro on a 7-day sizable moves in the currency market, which is down half.
We begin in the oil patch. Saudi Arabia.
Pretty much unchanged.
Welcome to Bloomberg, the first word Asia.
The U.S. and Japan duke it out over exchange rate.
Slumping onshore bond market in the
I'm Shemrian in New York.
And I'm Heidi Stroud-Watts in Sydney. You're watching Daybreak Australia. Well, that is almost it for Daybreak Australia this morning. Trading in New Zealand is underway. Australia is set to open for that staggered open at the top of the next hour. When it comes to New Zealand, we're seeing a bit of a recovery after what we saw yesterday for Kiwi stocks. The benchmark NZX 50 falling by the most in about a year, driven by energy stocks plunging. Rio Tinto saying it's taking a review of its aluminium business. In New Zealand today, we're seeing a better picture. We're also seeing Sydney looking to pop by about 0.5% when we get started at the top of the next hour. That is it for Daybreak Australia. This is Bloomberg. Good morning, I'm Heidi Stroud-Watts in Sydney. We're under an hour away from the market open in Japan and in South Korea.
Good evening from Bloomberg's global headquarters in New York. I'm Shemrian.
And I'm Sophie Kamarudin in Hong Kong. Welcome to Daybreak Asia.
Let's start with breaking news out of South Korea. We have the third quarter GDP numbers now, quarter-on-quarter growth of 0.4% for the third quarter, which is really missing analyst estimates of 0.5% growth. Is also a slowdown from the previous quarter. When it comes to the year-on-year numbers, it's 2%, bang in line with the estimates, and also the same level as in the previous quarter. In the second quarter, the economy grew 2% year-on-year. So the quarter-on-quarter numbers missing estimates. Of course, it's not surprising that we're seeing significant pressure for the South Korean economy. Exports have continued to slide. We have seen 10 months of export declines. The first 20 days of October, exports also falling almost 20%. Let's discuss what's happening in the South Korean economy and bring in from Seoul, Jung-Hoon Park, Standard Chartered Bank of Korea, Head of Korea Economic Research. Great to have you with us. So we are now seeing the South Korean economy slowing down. Not surprising, it's a bellwether of global trade, global tech as well, and we are seeing the trade tensions continue to weigh on these export vulnerable countries. What are your expectations for future growth and how the Bank of Korea can react to this?
Oh, okay. So today's like a 0.4% is pretty much aligned with the market expectation. I think I expect around 0.5, but pretty much aligned with the market expectation. So we expect the Korea will grow 1.9% by the end of the year. So that is more or less like a market consensus now. I think today we expect a bit of a positive surprise because government has been advocating Korea can grow over 2% for this year. But today's number is not, in the market's perspective, it's not a horrible number. It's pretty much aligned with our expectation. Next year, actually, we are more positive about the Korean economy. We think like IT down cycle is going to end probably early next year. I think IT will be driven by the 5G installation, and that is going to be helpful for the IT upcycle next year. And also, like construction has been really negative for Korea for the last 2 years. I think we'll see a bottom movie from probably next year. Government policy is also changing. Like the government is trying to support construction like investment, and also government's budget, like a fiscal budget, is going to be a bit helpful for Korea. Also, like a government budget is going to be more allocated growth sector. So I think I'm more positive for 2020 growth. I think Korea will grow around 2.4% next year.
But this year, as you said, your expectation is for 1.9% growth, which would still be below the BOK's own growth forecast of 2.2%, right? I do wonder how much room the BOK has to act, because this GTV chart on the Bloomberg just shows that South Korea has entered deflation for the first time ever in the month of September. Could we see the BOK moving even further after the rate cut that we saw earlier this month?
Yes, I expect one more cut will come probably next year. The market is expecting one more cut in the first half. I expect the second half, but the reason is like the further easing is not going to help the economy's growth, but I think it's going to help the sentiment. So for BOK's perspective, with a very low inflation, and there is a less risk for the financial stability with macro-prudential implemented last year. So I think BOK will cut it because they can cut it. So we expect a further cut only probably next year.
We also heard from the BOK governor saying last week that, if they run out of room when it comes to interest rate cuts, they're looking at other contingency plans. They're constantly studying some of the unconventional policy tools that have been used by other central banks and countries around the world. Is QE a possibility for Korea?
I think Korea's perspective, like Korea's base rate is still 1.25, so still room for the monetary easing. So I think when all the tools are exhausted, I think they will think about it. But right now, I don't think like Korea is thinking about the QE type of the monetary policy. I think they will emphasize more fiscal policy for next year.
How much room is there on the fiscal side, given that we know that household debt is such a big issue for the country?
Well, but the fiscal household debt is actually an issue. But the overall household asset is quite big in Korea. Like a household asset is almost 6 times bigger than household debt. So I don't think a household debt is going to cause any financial instability in Korea.
It was really interesting that you mentioned that you are expecting the IT industry to recover in South Korea. We are expecting SK Hynix results later showing what chip makers are doing these days. Why do you see potential for the bottoming out of this industry? We have continuously talked about a bottoming out, and it still hasn't come.
That's true. So like it's supposed to be bottoming out around this time, so we are not seeing any bottoming out. But 5G is going to be implemented. Usually there is a cycle of the investment cycle. So the country is about to implement like a 5G new service. So then there will be more demand for IT. So next year, I think the cycle-wise, like beginning of the new up cycle will come eventually.
So you're talking about more optimism when it comes to the IT industry. I do wonder how much of the weakness that we have seen in the South Korean economy stems from real fundamental issues with the South Korean economy, as opposed to just overall pessimism about South Korea, given how exposed it is to global trade tensions and the semiconductor downturn and so many other external factors.
I think, yeah, so like, somehow I think the pessimism toward Korea is a bit overblown because when you look at the number, like Korea's export started to decrease around November last year. So up to October, Korea's export has increased quite rapidly last year because of even with the trade tension. So I think this year's kind of export next number is kind of a more normalization of last year's export growth. So probably from the November, like the decrease of the export will moderate because of the base effect. So then I think in the market we'll say like, okay, there has been too much pessimism towards Korea, and also like a trade tension between Korea and Japan was another kind of bad news to Korea. But the Prime Minister Abe and Prime Minister Lee is going to meet today. So if any positive news comes out, that is going to another positive news to Korea.
We're also expecting the Japanese Prime Minister and the Korean Premier to be meeting today at about 11 a.m. Is a thawing of the geopolitical tension something that creates a bit more optimism for the economy as well?
I think so, yes, because there has been a bit of too much worry because Korea is like interlinks with Japan. Also, like we are importing key intermediates from Japan. So, what if like there is a tension, like Korea is not going to be able to produce a semiconductor, but it's not actually hurting the Korea's production as of now. I think it's a market, not a supply issue.
Thank you so much for joining us. That was Chung-Hoon Park, Standard Chartered Bank Korea, Head of Korea Economic Research, joining us there. Aussie markets have just opened for trade. So, what are you watching?
Well, taking a look at Aussie shares, they are getting gone up about 0.4% this morning, with tech and energy leading sectoral gains. Now, this morning, guys, we did have flash PMI numbers from Australia, which could underscore concerns that the RBA easing isn't enough to see a turnaround in the economy. Now, elsewhere, futures in Tokyo nudging higher. We are seeing the Kospi potentially opening flat this morning on a very busy day ahead for Korea with the latest GDP data that we just got. A miss on the estimate for the quarterly growth while meeting the forecast for 2% year-on-year expansion. Now, we also have earnings galore sharing with SA Hynix headlining along with Hyundai Motor. Now, I want to check in some early movers in Sydney if I could, because we are seeing moves in Fortescue this morning. The stock so with the Fortescue is one of those highlights, of course, because we did see a quarterly update from the iron ore miner, shipments rising 5%, adding to the rebound that we see in global volume, Sherry.
Thank you so much for that. Let's now get the first 4 news with Radhika Gupta. Radhika.
Thanks, Sherry. President Trump is lifting sanctions against Turkey after it complied with a ceasefire agreement with Kurdish forces in Syria. Trump says it shows his decision to withdraw U.S. forces from northern Syria has paid dividends. But the move was criticized by Republicans and his own envoy to the Syria crisis. Ambassador James Jeffrey told a House committee U.S. forces had not completed their mission of defeating the so-called Islamic State. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has warned Congress that if the U.S. doesn't take a lead in tech innovation and cryptocurrencies, then China will. Zuckerberg faced a grilling from lawmakers on the House Financial Services Committee over fact-checking political ads, prevention of manipulated videos, and online child exploitation. And he defended plans for Facebook's Libra cryptocurrency.
This project is too big for any one company to do on its own, which is why we set up this independent Libra association with a number of other companies and nonprofits. It's a very complex project, and as you say, it's risky.
Google says it's built a quantum computer that performed a calculation in 200 seconds that would take the fastest conventional supercomputers about 10,000 years. Rather than storing information in zeros and ones, quantum computers rely on qubits, which can be both 0 and 1 at the same time. However, IBM researchers have disputed whether Google has really achieved something that normal computers cannot. China is taking another step to opening up to foreign investment. It will allow foreign firms not already engaged in the investment business to conduct equity investment in domestic companies. It's the latest in a series of moves to make it more attractive and convenient for foreigners to invest. Earlier this month, the regulators announced a timetable for foreign financial firms to take full control of Chinese ventures. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Radhika Gupta. This is Bloomberg. Heidi.
Monica, thank you. Coming up next, Ford is cutting its profit outlook amid sluggish sales in China. We'll sift through the earnings bonanza.
Plus, CLSA Sanjay Rana break down South Korea. SK Hynix is set to report its latest earnings in under an hour's time. This is Bloomberg.
Então tá toda molhada.
Não é feriado. Então vai lá com o Samuel.
Será que pingou aqui? Então vou ter.
I'm Heidi Stradwaltz in Sydney.
And I'm Sherry Ann in New York. Tesla shares are surging in late trading after a surprise profit. Earnings came in at $1.86 per share, blowing away the average estimates for a 24-cent loss. Bloomberg News U.S. Autos editor Craig Trudell joins us now. Craig, so we saw the first profit in about a year. What drove this?
So there are a lot of things to sort of dig in here. The cost cutting that Elon Musk has been doing for the last year really sort of came to, it came through this quarter. That's at least sort of how the company is putting this forward. There are a lot of questions we have about things like a deferred revenue that they recognized during the quarter. They were able to do that by activating a certain autopilot feature toward the end of the quarter, so that helped. There's always a bit of a question about just how much credit revenue helps them, and that sometimes comes out of the 10Q a little bit after the earnings report. But you do have to look at what the company is at least putting forward. The idea that the cost structure has been resolved to a great degree, the fact that they are selling a lot of higher priced Model 3s overseas, and that they'll work their way down sort of the prices in those markets, that's all helping. But there are still a lot of sort of unanswered questions about exactly how they got there. We've sort of been here before where they've really surprised the market with a profit that nobody saw coming.
They have also talked about that Shanghai factory, right? That's saying that will really help their revenue. So what else have we heard about the Chinese market?
So that plan is very interesting. Dana Ho has a story for Business Week in the upcoming year ahead issue about the idea that this is a plant that it was a field of mud at the beginning of this year, and it's just starting trial production now of the Model 3. That's a really crucial factory for them because they need to be able to price the Model 3 more competitively in that market, and they can do so by avoiding import duties. And they also are going to get more favorable tax treatment as part of Elon Musk sort of wining and dining folks in the Shanghai area very recently. So that's really going to be helpful for them in the coming quarters.
Craig, how's the solar part of the business looking? It's been a pretty ugly quarter. Was there any mention of whether they still are sticking to this possibility of producing or installing 1,000 solar roofs a week by the end of the year?
Yeah, Elon Musk is talking a lot about that on the call, which is still ongoing. So the energy business has been a really, struggling part of the company for a while now. To your point, the solar installations have been trending down for quite a while. There's been some doubts about, whether acquiring Solar City was the right move a few years ago. And it was really looking like the answer was no, but he's sort of making the case that the company sort of had its hands full getting the Model 3 out, that they had to sort of take resources away from that business, and that they're putting more attention on that part of the company now. They did make some changes with how they position that business during the quarter. It's still a little bit early to say just how successful that's going to be in the long run, but he's talking about the energy business being a significant part of Tesla going forward, far from abandoning that business, which is something that some of the bears have sort of speculated may be possible given just how much they've struggled.
Craig, thank you so much for that. Our US Autos editor, Craig Trudell, there on Tesla. You can also turn to your Bloomberg for more on this. Go to Tila Goji, a commentary analysis from Bloomberg's expert editors on that Tesla earnings call, which is still ongoing at the minute. We'll stay with autos. Ford has cut its full-year profit outlook after a rocky quarter that saw sluggish sales in China and higher costs in the North American market. Shares fell in extended trade on the warning. Joining us now is Bloomberg News Autos reporter Chester Dawson in Detroit. Chester, why was it such a terrible period for Ford?
Well, basically the third quarter was difficult for many automakers, but Ford had a particularly troubled quarter due in large part to the problem-plagued launch of a major vehicle for them, their Explorer SUV. That's a major breadwinner for them. It's very important that they get that product out there and get it right, and the ramp-up of their production has been nothing short of disastrous, so that's what really tripped them up in the most recent quarter.
And guidance was really disappointing going forward as well, right? Is this largely based on, the well-documented woes and the slowdown that we've seen in China?
That's a big part of it, and Ford CEO Hackett on the conference call with the analysts mentioned that they realize there's a problem. They want to get back to profitability. They lost $281 million in China in the quarter, and he said that one of the things they're going to be trying to do is launching more products tailored to the needs of the Chinese market specifically.
Where are we in that $11 billion restructuring that was spearheaded by the CEO?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think a lot of people are wondering that after these earnings because the company's been promising this turnaround like the promised land, but it just seems to get farther and farther out. There's always something that trips it up, some headwind. They are, making some headway. They've got a few new products coming out, and they say they're getting closer to turning the corner, but if you just look at the stock price, we're still quite a ways out from anything they could declare a victory about.
Chester Dawson, thank you so much, our autos reporter there joining us from Detroit. Let's now get to Hong Kong for What to Watch market this morning. So
In Sydney, we are seeing some stock movers. Qantas off nearly 4% this morning. The carrier did report a 1.8% yearly rise in first quarter revenue thanks to international operations offsetting domestic weakness, but it did flag caution around the impact of Hong Kong protests, which could dent first half profit by 25 million Australian dollars. Now let's switch out the board to check in on JB Hi-Fi, which is gaining ground nearly 6% here after affirming its fiscal 2020 guidance. Now it did register an increase in Australian sales for the first quarter and expects full year sales at about 7.25 billion Australian dollars. And checking in quickly on Fortescue, with the stock gaining ground nearly 3% after posting a 5% rise in first quarter iron ore shipments. Now the miner said demand from China is still strong. So the first quarter volumes putting Fortescue on track for its annual target. Heidi.
Sophie Cameron there in Hong Kong. Up next, WeWork's new leadership says it's time to focus on making a profit. But can the troubled startup pull off a turnaround? This is Bloomberg.
This is Daybreak Asia. I'm Sherrian in New York.
And I'm Hattie Stroud-Watts in Sydney. It is the end of one of the more dramatic business debacles in recent memory. SoftBank has come to the rescue of WeWork with a $9.5 billion package. Now the startup will spend the next month putting together a plan that will prioritise profit over growth. Bloomberg Technologies' Ellen Hewitt has been covering the company from the very beginning. And Ellen, top brass held a meeting with employees. We know there's a fair bit of dissatisfaction among the staff. What do we know?
So we know that there was a big all-hands meeting at WeWork this morning Eastern Time in which all staff were addressed by Marcelo Claret, who is the new executive chairman of WeWork. And he is someone who's coming from SoftBank, and his big message was, look, now we have some funding in place and we're secure for the time being. We need to make some big changes going forward to really focus on the core business and in fact pursue profitability much more fervently than before and at the expense of growth.
What does that mean then? What will they start doing in order to prioritize profit?
So as part of what Marcelo laid out today in the meeting, there's going to be big cuts to WeWork staff. We anticipate somewhere in the thousands. This is a company that has anywhere from 12 to 14,000 employees, depending on who's counting. So it's going to be a major cut. And they're also looking to cut side businesses, as we've reported in the past, looking to sell off some of the acquired businesses that the company has picked up along the way, as well as some other things that may be more symbolic than anything else, such as the $60 million Gulfstream jet that the company had bought last year to let Adam Newman fly around the country. They're just making changes. They really want to say this is a new chapter.
Yeah, but tightening the purse strings doesn't extend to these severance packages for the co-founders?
Well, so as we reported also, it seems like the two co-CEOs, Artie Minson and Sebastian Gunningham, have secured severance packages for themselves. They don't anticipate leaving, but it seems like that's something that was part of this deal with SoftBank to protect them in case they are leaving. And as well, as you mentioned, there has been a lot of ire among WeWork employees for the exit package that was given to Adam Newman, the founder and former CEO. Basically, he was given the option to sell up to $1 billion worth of his shares, as well as a $185 million consulting fee, which they framed, Marcelo framed to staff today as a necessary fee that they had to pay in order to get Adam to agree to a non-compete and to agree to have him step down from the board. And that has produced a lot of anger among the staff, as we had a story yesterday with snippets and references from internal Slack channels where employees are saying, you got to be kidding me, like this guy comes in and tanks our business and he's walking away a billionaire. That may have all been legal, but it felt like it really stung to a lot of employees.
Yeah, quite a bit of outrage there. Ellen, thank you so much for that. Ellen Hewitt there with the latest on WeWork. Let's get you a quick check of latest business flash headlines. Crown Resorts says VIP turnover at its Australian resorts slumped almost 50% last quarter compared to a year ago. Regular main floor gaming showed a marginal gain. The company also dismissed what it called sensationalist allegations surrounding an investigation into corruption claims surrounding its high roller program. A federal investigation into the claims is due to begin next week.
Australia's Newcrest Mining says gold output dropped 23% from the previous quarter to just under 512,000 ounces. It's also warning first half free cash will be substantially lower as a result of maintenance shutdowns and the acquisition of a mine in Canada. However, it sees full-year gold production beating earlier forecasts on additional output from its Red Chris operation.
Dominion Energy and Smithfield Foods are expanding their joint bet on producing renewable natural gas from pig waste. The Virginia-based power company and the world's largest pork producer plan to invest as much as $500 million to capture methane from hog farms for processing into natural gas, used for heating or power generation. Smithfield's CEO says the plan is audacious but economically viable. This is Bloomberg. This is Deborah Gage. I'm Hattie Stroud-Watts in Sydney.
And I'm Sherrian in New York. It's a busy day for South Korean earnings. Let's turn to Seoul for what to watch in markets. So,
On SK Hynix, which is due to report this morning with a steep drop in profit anticipated, and the outlook for chip prices as well as the potential impact of Japan's export curbs will also be key factors to watch. Now, Hyundai Motor reported numbers, they're expected to come in stronger on the year, but litigation costs may weigh. Also watching cues on future investments from the car maker around tech like robotics. And when POSCO reports later, the focus will be on guidance around steel prices. And as the Korean earnings season ramps up, here's the picture on profit estimates, which have been cut by about 29-30%, the fastest pace then since the global financial crisis. That's not boding well after companies in all sectors missed estimates in the last reporting period. So no bottoming out yet, and putting Korea on course then for the worst annual earnings growth since at least 2002. Little optimism then on top of this morning's GDP data, which showed the economy grew at a slower pace in the third quarter, and adding then to worries around investment plans. Heidi.
Sophie Cameron there in Hong Kong. Let's get you the first word news now with Radhika Gupta. Radhika.
Heidi, a pro-establishment lawmaker in Hong Kong has confirmed that Beijing is considering a plan to replace Carrie Lam as chief executive. Michael Chen says he has information that the Chinese government is considering candidates to fill Hong Kong's top job next year. But China's foreign ministry reiterated its long-standing position that the central government still firmly supports Lam.
It is a political rumor out of ulterior motives. The central government will firmly support Chief Executive Carrie Lam and the Hong Kong government's administration in accordance with the law to stop violence and restore order as soon as possible.
China is planning to sell euro-denominated bonds amid a slump in borrowing costs in the currency. It would be China's first eurobond issuance in 15 years. Average yields on investment-grade eurobonds are below 0.5%, close to a record low hit in August. China returned to the dollar bond market 2 years ago after a gap of about 13 years. The European Union has left UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson hanging as officials in Brussels debate whether to grant him a third extension to the Brexit process. EU ambassadors meeting in Brussels agreed to give the UK more time, but couldn't decide on how much. France wants a tight deadline of November 15th, but other countries prefer January the 31st. A decision's been deferred until Friday. And Russian President Vladimir Putin has courted more than 40 leaders of African nations in Sochi at the first ever Russia-Africa summit. Putin hailed what he called the continent's enormous potential for growth and negotiated deals to tap its riches, including diamonds, uranium and oil. Russia is following China in expanding its influence in the region. Global news, 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Radhika Gupta, this is Bloomberg. Sherry?
Radhika, thank you. President Trump is seeking to take credit for a ceasefire in Syria, painting it as a victory for his unconventional foreign policy. As part of the agreement, he removed all U.S. sanctions imposed after Turkey launched its military operation.
The sanctions will be lifted unless something happens that we're not happy with. This was an outcome created by us, the United States, and nobody else.
Let's cross to D.C. and our reporter Greg Sullivan. Greg, so I thought the longer-term ceasefire had been brokered by Turkey and Russia. How is the president framing this as a victory for U.S. foreign policy?
Well, that's right. President Trump is trying to put forth the argument that he's removing the troops, that U.S. troops are not in danger, and that there's actually some kind of historic peace here. But that argument isn't necessarily landing with lawmakers on Capitol Hill, who met Trump's announcement with a range of skepticism about whether the ceasefire would actually hold, to criticism. Some GOP lawmakers said that the deal appears more likely to benefit Russia and Turkey than the U.S. at all. And complicating matters even more, Trump's envoy to Syria was actually on Capitol Hill today and said that the deal had the possibility to bolster the reemergence of the Islamic State group. He also said that around 100 Islamic State detainees had escaped. So that's not likely to help President Trump with his support among lawmakers.
And Congress is not going to be happy that already the president has lifted all U.S. sanctions on Turkey. What are we expecting on that front?
Well, that's right. President Trump did lift the sanctions that he imposed after Turkey invaded Syria. He also warned that he would be willing to reimpose sanctions, though that Congress, for its part, does seem to be moving at their own pace. On the House side, House Democrats have already said that they plan to keep moving forward on sanctions legislation. On the Senate side, there have been some really vocal proponents of doing a sanctions measure, but the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, seems to have cooled to that a little bit, warning that there should be serious debate before sanctions are used as the first, last, or only tool.
Greg, when it comes to the impeachment probe, the latest was quite a bit of commotion among GOP members of Congress today.
That's right. It was quite a scene there. Investigators were set to hear testimony from a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Laura Cooper. She was going to talk a little bit about the delay in military aid to Ukraine, but that was postponed almost 5 hours as about 24 Republican lawmakers stormed the secured area where Democrats have been hearing testimonies from some of these witnesses. That area known as the SCIF, lawmakers typically have to leave all their electronics outside of it, and they created quite a scene, according to some lawmakers who described screaming and shouting. And one GOP lawmaker even released some audio from what he said was within the SCIF. Now, apparently they did this with President Trump's blessing. They apparently told him of this plan last night. He gave them their blessing. They're kind of upset that they're not involved in some of the hearings, but it's really only members that aren't on these committees, so Democrats have filed public hearings. So.
Greg Sullivan in D.C., thank you so much. We have breaking news out of South Korea as well. We are getting SK Hynix third quarter earnings. Now, we are seeing their net income coming in at 293.2 billion won. This is a bigger beat than expected. The estimate was of 297 billion won. The third quarter operating profit also a beat, 472.56 billion won. The third quarter sales also much higher than expected at 6.84 trillion won. We'll have plenty more and break down these numbers after the break. This is Bloomberg. This is Daybreak Asia. I'm Sharian in New York.
And I'm Heidi Stroud-Watts in Sydney. Going back to those breaking figures from SK Hynix, which delivered a beat on operating profit. Let's get some immediate reaction from Seoul. Sanjeev Rana, who's CLSA's senior analyst, joins us now. Sanjeev, this was much, much better than the fairly dire picture that we were expecting. The headline numbers are all pretty good, pretty much a beat across the board. Are we seeing the bottom of this terrible period now?
Yes, good morning, and thanks for having me on your program. Yes, the numbers from SK Hynix operating profit was 15% ahead of the recent consensus expectations, and it's clear that the memory cycle has bottomed. This beat, we think, was driven by higher than expected shipments. The company was guiding the actual shipments in third quarter were way ahead of the company's initial guidance, and that partially drove the beat.
We're also seeing, Sanjeev, another line saying that the company is seeing DRAM and NAND capacity to fall in 2020, potentially indicating that they're going to be cutting capex. So far, the supply side of things hasn't made too much of a difference, given that Samsung doesn't seem to be doing much of the same. Is this picture going to change?
We have seen DRAM capex cuts across the industry. For DRAM capex this year will be down about 25 to 30% range, and next year we expect it to decline by 5 to 10%. So almost all DRAM makers have taken measures to control supply this year, and that's why we are seeing overall earlier than expected clearance of inventories, and price declines are softening now.
What are we seeing on the demand side of things? Because SK Hynix is now coming out and saying that 5G smartphones will contribute to memory demand growth.
Yes, so in third quarter, the DRAM shipments were up 23% versus their initial guidance of about 8 to 10% growth. So definitely, this was a big beat as far as the shipments are concerned, and this was primarily driven by this 5G related, smartphone inventory build up by the Chinese smartphone makers. This will continue. We are expecting global 5G smartphone shipments to be like about 270 million next year, and this means that demand for DRAM and NAND from 5G handsets, which typically consumes a much higher amounts of DRAM compared to 4G handsets, should be very strong. So mobile demand from 5G will be a key driver for DRAM and NAND demand next year.
SK Hynix also saying that data center clients' DRAM orders have increased. Let me just ask you about the stock price levels, because we have seen really SK Hynix gaining 28% year to date. This GTV chart on the Bloomberg showing that chip makers have led the gains among Asia tech stock indices this year. This is the MSCI Tech Index against the MSCI Asia Pacific Index. Now, how are we expecting chip makers in Asia to perform this year when we have already seen so much upside for their shares?
We think the outperformance by chip makers will continue because this is backed by earnings upgrades. Consensus earnings for Samsung and Hynix, they bottomed in third quarter, and now recently we have started seeing upgrades. But if you look at the NAND pricing, it has been somewhat better than expected, and we think for next year too, there is a high chance that that demand growth will exceed the supply growth for both DRAM and NAND. As such, price increases could be higher than expected. That is likely to drive consensus earnings higher. So in the past, we have seen a very strong correlation between share price and the consensus earnings revisions, and we think that will continue.
Sanjeev, what about the geopolitical factors? Because we know up to 15% of their revenue comes from Huawei, which has been the subject of a US ban. We also know that there's some raw materials challenges because of the Japanese export curbs. Do you think these are going to be issues going forward that will still weigh?
As far as the Japanese export curves are concerned, we didn't see any impact on chip makers' production in July, August, and September. So, and the governments of the two countries are working on some solutions. So, I don't expect there will be any production disruptions from this, the export restrictions from Japan going forward. But as far as the Huawei issue is concerned, yes, definitely there is some uncertainty. So far, it has been pretty good. I mean, the trade spat between U.S. and China hasn't hit Huawei's overall shipments as much, as market has feared in, let's say, in May of this year. And for next year, we think the 5G shipments will be primarily driven by the Chinese market, so it will not have much impact overall on the memory demand outlook, because China will be accounting for more than about 120 to 150 million units of 5G smartphone shipments out of 270 million.
Sanjay Rana, thank you so much joining us from CLSA. And as the U.S.-China trade war continues, we have discussed not only the Japan-Korea tensions, but also the China-U.S. tensions taking a toll on many industries. Let's see the impact it's having on technology. Joining us now is IDC President Crawford Pratt. Crawford, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's discuss how the U.S.-China trade tensions are reshaping the world of technology. We have seen the latest tariffs expected this month, delayed until December. How much more leeway does this give companies for them to stockpile on supplies?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I think that it gives them fairly significant leeway, and I think that we've seen this over and over and over. So the impact of the tariffs had, very little impact on overall IT demand in 2018, and as we've gone into 2019, it's also really not had a significant impact. Now, where it has had an impact is in areas, say, like personal computers. Last quarter, personal computers, we actually saw some single-digit growth in that market, and that's because of some of the stockpiling that we saw. And what we found is that the U.S. list of products that would be affected by tariffs has been very, very cleverly constructed. It's been constructed not to include things like smartphones yet, not to include things like PCs yet. And that means that we're seeing consumers and enterprises buying ahead of potential tariff impact, which has actually had a positive impact. Now, of course, if the tariffs do go into effect later this year, that would have an impact going into 2020. But right now, we haven't seen a huge impact.
How flexible are supply chains at the moment, and will it have an impact, these trade tensions, on IT budgets?
Yeah, so supply chains are not that flexible, but there's been some time to adjust. So we've seen some manufacturers be able to start to adjust production and where they actually do final assembly of product. But the reality is that going forward, this could affect overall demand, and the overall supply chain can only take so much. So, for example, we're looking at somewhere around 3.5% to 4% IT growth, overall IT spending growth for sort of traditional products in this year, 2019. If we were to go to a tariff escalation scenario, which is kind of where we are today, we think that could take maybe 0.5 point of growth off overall demand by the end of this year. And then going into 2020, if we did kick tariffs up, you could see a point, maybe 2 points reduction in overall IT spending as the market would just slow and you wouldn't see that sell through of products going forward.
Crawford, if we did have a upbeat, at least phase one mini deal resolution to the trade tensions, and markets and investors are feeling pretty good about things over the next few months, how quickly does it take to unwind the damage that's been done sentiment-wise when it comes to capex spend and investment?
I don't think it would take much, and I think that would happen relatively rapidly. I think what you would see is that companies would continue to spend or would be fairly resilient in terms of their spending. And in that scenario, I think we would continue to see, maybe a 0.5 point increase in overall IT spending, something in that 3.5% to 4.5% band. Again, I think that overall enterprises and their spending have not been that significantly affected. So I think that their ability to say, okay, you know what, coast is clear, we're going to continue to spend, I think it would be more of a steady as the market goes. I don't think you would see a major snap back because the impact hasn't been that strong yet.
In terms of the negotiations, the many rounds of talks for this trade war, technology has really been placed in the too hard basket, right? Because it's largely seen as this strategic competition between China and the US, the two superpowers. Do you see a meaningful compromise possible, or is it that we are really looking at this, kind of existential split between a world of technology that's created by China and then the US?
Yeah, I think going forward, it really comes down to what technology you're talking about. For example, I think that when you look at how overall technology is developed, core microprocessor technology and the demand for those kinds of products, I think that those will not be as significantly affected. Now, if you look at Chinese demand for products going forward, what we see is that the Chinese demand for products tends to be much more hardware centric, and Chinese markets tend to be much more hardware centric. They tend to purchase things like classic personal computers, servers, enterprise infrastructure, and those products. So far, rhetoric aside, we've continued to see Chinese demand for those products be relatively strong. Now, for emerging technologies, China tends to be very strong in things like AI, things like robotics, things like augmented and virtual reality. Interestingly, the Chinese economy doesn't spend as much on things like enterprise software, and there aren't as many indigenous products for enterprise software there. So I think that over time, what we'll see is that China will continue to be relatively hardware-centric, and will continue to buy the same kinds of products that we buy in the Western world. Where it will change is things like what your last guest was talking about, areas like potentially 5G, where there you could see different suppliers supplying 5G technology into the Chinese economy versus other economies. So there you see Huawei selling potentially a lot locally, whereas outside of areas where Huawei does business, you would see a benefit to companies like Ericsson and companies like Nokia for 5G infrastructure. But I think that overall, where we're likely headed here is some kind of a deal, where we see a market much like the market we've seen in the past, where everyone's competing on sort of the same traditional markets.
Crawford, thank you so much for joining us today, IDC President. And more ahead on Daybreak Asia, this is Bloomberg.
actually poor.
No foreplay?
Eat your bag of Lay's with a smile on your face.
All the diseases have been taken. I'll take a taxi.
All right, some breaking news crossing the Bloomberg when it comes to this beleaguered WeWork situation. SoftBank is to seek U.S. national security review of the WeWork deal. We're going to get more details, but we know that WeWork will be really spending the next month putting together a plan to try and get back to profit over growth. This after SoftBank really was successful with this restructuring deal. Sherry, this is just the latest twist and turn we've seen for this, former high flyer when it comes to the Silicon Valley darling. After that IPO didn't work out, and it's really just been bleeding cash. We're now hearing that SoftBank, possibly as part of its investment and its restructuring efforts for WeWork, to be seeking a U.S. national security review of the...
Fala, galera! O pessoal já vai abrir o mercado aí asiático. Vamos ver como é que vai se comportar, né? Por enquanto a gente está vendido no ouro e comprado no Dow. Ok? Seja bem-vindo, William. Vamos lá ver aí como que esse mercado vai se comportar na abertura aí do mercado asiático. Falta 4 minutos. Já vou fazer as operaçãozinhas aí, legal. Dois minutinhos, pessoal. É esse movimento, tá, pessoal, desse horário que vai determinar aí onde vai o ouro e o Dow, tá? Aí eles vão subir até 7 horas da manhã. O Drag vai falar amanhã, né? Que já é hoje lá para eles. Então amanhã o Drag vai falar por volta de 8 horas, 8h30. Aí vai dar uma oscilada boa, tá, pessoal? No Forex. Vai abrir aí. Já. Então nós temos esse calendário aqui, tá, pessoal? Amanhã o Drag falando aí. Tá bom? Às 8h45, ó. Então amanhã tá recheado aí. A partir das 4h30 da manhã. O PMI aí da Alemanha. E aí o Drag falando aí às 8h45, tá? Ó, vai torar amanhã aí, legal. Amanhã vai ser bom. Vai dar muito oscilar bastante, tá? Vamos lá, vai abrir aí mercado asiático. Abriu aí. Vamos ver aí. O stop do dólar, do ouro, tá no 14,94. O stop do Dow tá no 26,830. Vamos lá, vamos ver se vai dar pancada aí. Normalmente esse é o horário que dá pancada. É os maiores candles aí. Do dia. Até agora. Do dia todo, tá, pessoal? Agora às 9 horas. São um candle gigantesco. Vamos ver aí, pessoal. Você precisa perder aqui, ó, o 14,9165 para poder andar. Vamos lá, pessoal. Ouro querendo voltar aí. Não deve voltar, tá, pessoal? Apesar que ele tá fazendo esse movimento aí, mas ele deve voltar, tá? Tá indo aí, pessoal, agora. Tá indo aí, pessoal, ó o dólar. Ó o ouro aí. Demorou, mas tá vindo. Vamos lá, pessoal. Tá vendo aí, pessoal? Alvo do ouro é 14,88. Galera. Galera, eu vou nessa aí. Então vou deixar aí para vocês aí a análise do ouro, tá? Nós estamos vendido. O stop está no 14,94 e o alvo da gente da venda está aqui 14,88. Tá legal? Tá aqui embaixo. Stop 14,94, alvo 14,88 no ouro. Estamos aqui comprados no Dow. Nosso stop está aqui no 26,830 e nosso alvo está aqui no 26,980, ok? Então são esses calls aí que a gente tem aí para vocês no Dow e no ouro, ok? Então é isso aí, pessoal. É bem provavelmente que durante a madrugada aí o ouro deve pegar nosso gain lá e o Dow aqui pode demorar um pouquinho, tá? Subir, mas deve subir, tá bom? Ok, pessoal? Então é isso aí, galera. Valeu aí. Uma boa noite a todos. A gente se vê amanhã pela manhã. Quem for me acompanhar aí, Sala do Além às 8h40 da manhã. E depois canal do YouTube às 10. E aí quem não for acompanhar aí no mini índice, no mini dólar, a gente se encontra mais tarde, né? Às 18h50. Valeu, pessoal. Um abraço a todos. Fiquem com Deus e até amanhã. Muito obrigado pela atenção. Valeu. Tchau, tchau.